here in the studio discussing the 700th anniversary of the death of Marco Polo and a new book he is writing. Also, yellow cards, blue cards, football sin bins. We've got to hear from a former player and a referee as to what's the latest thoughts on that. Royal updates, of course, King Charles's latest diagnosis. And did you see that extraordinary interview by Tucker Carlson with President Putin? What does that mean for the West? And then finally, yes, we're going to be celebrating National Pizza Day by making a pizza here in the studio. But first up, to get your morning's headlines.
Richard, thank you very much and good morning. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Foreign Secretary says he's deeply concerned about the prospect of a planned Israeli ground invasion of the southern Gaza city of Rafah. Lord Cameron said on his Twitter X account, the priority must be an immediate pause in the fighting and progress towards a permanent ceasefire. Yesterday, at least 44 Palestinians, including more than a dozen children, were killed by Israeli airstrikes in Rafah. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu signalled there would be an imminent invasion, saying he'd asked his military to prepare to evacuate hundreds of thousands of civilians. His aim, he says, defeating Hamas. The Defence Secretary is said to be furious as he orders a review of the Ministry of Defence's diversity and inclusivity policy. It comes as it's been reported in today's Telegraph that the Army wants to relax security clearance vetting for overseas recruits to boost diversity and inclusion. Grant Shapps told the Sunday Telegraph that he's ready to go to battle over the matter. He's warned that there will be no lowering of security clearance requirements on his watch. According to the paper, the UK's armed forces are looking overseas because they've reportedly failed to hit recruitment targets. Fujitsu is set to have received more than £3.4 billion through contracts from Treasury-linked organisations since 2019, despite its role in the post office scandal. The Commons Treasury Committee says Fujitsu was awarded around £1.4 billion worth of deals since the 2019 High Court ruling, concluding there'd been numerous failings in its Horizon IT system. £2 billion worth of contracts were also agreed before 2019 and remained active thereafter. A group of MPs wrote to organisations including HMRC, the Financial Conduct Authority and the Bank of England to demand details of their agreements with Fujitsu. The committee said all three have spent considerable sums with them. The Housing Secretary is warning that young people shut out of the UK's housing market could turn to authoritarianism. Michael Gove says a failure by the government to tackle the housing crisis could harm democracy, as well as the Conservatives' chances at the next election. In an interview with The Times, he says the traditional route for young people to work hard and get on the housing ladder has gone. Gove criticised Labour for, he says, continuously rejecting housing policies.
The difference between a party saying that its policy is pro-builder, not blocker, and then when we bring things forward, every single Conservative MP, every single Conservative I know backed our proposals for new homes, and Labour were whipped to a man and woman against it. So this is not about individuals, this is about a party that makes big claims, and yet, as we see time after time, it turns turtle. And that's why Keir Starmer is the jellyfish of British politics. He's transparent, spineless, swept along by the tide.
Kwasi Kwarteng says immigration must be a key focus for the government when it comes to having success at the next general election. The former Chancellor also told GB News' Camilla Tominey that his decision to not stand for re-election as an MP was one he'd had for a while.
Thinking about it for a long time.
Have you? How long?
And there was, well, ever since the beginning of the Parliament, actually. I had thought, and I was Minister of State at that point, I had thought that, 3 terms, obviously we had more elections, but 15 years is probably, in this modern climate, a reasonable amount of time to be an MP. 2 of the principal things that Conservatives should be fighting for are lower taxes and secure borders, strong on immigration, and strong on taxes.
Well,
and
would
if
you
look
like
at
to see an immigration cap?
Yes, I mean, there's got to be something on it. I mean, on 2 of those metrics, we haven't, frankly, performed very well.
No. And finally, the King has shared his heartfelt thanks for the overwhelming public support he's received in his first message to the public since being diagnosed with cancer. His Majesty said such kind thoughts are the greatest comfort and encouragement. News of the diagnosis was announced by Buckingham Palace on Monday that he's facing a form of cancer unrelated to his recent prostate treatment. The King says sharing his own diagnosis has helped promote public understanding and shine a light on the work of many organisations supporting cancer patients and their families across the UK and the wider world. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
And a very good morning to all of you. Well, as you can see, I'm not Michael Portillo. No, he's away this week. But we have an action-packed, full-on show. Thank you to Tatiana for the news just then. Now, today, unbelievably, it's National Inventor Day. Yes, this was actually approved by resolution in Congress some 30 years ago. Inventions are very, very important. So today is National Inventor Day. And I want to say, what would you like to invent? I've worked out what I'd like to invent, and that's some form of duster and hoover that could suck away wokery. It's driving me mad. We're going to be talking about it later in the show. So let me know what you'd like to invent or any other thoughts or views. All of that, of course, gbviews@gbnews.com or on Twitter @gbnews. What would you like to invent? Well, you'll recall back at the New Year, I had an important segment discussion with two relatives of people who tragically had taken their own lives due to errors and concerns and inaccuracies in the child maintenance service. And it was a really, really difficult segment. Now, look, we all know that parents must pay their responsibilities for children, and that's important, and do it promptly. And indeed, the government has just made new announcements about that today. My concern, though, is what happens when actually they make mistakes. We don't want government departments to make mistakes. But first of all, just take a listen to this clip about evidence, whether it's there or not, from a select committee.
I've received, as I suspect a number of us have, quite a few sort of angry emails. I'm forwarding you case details. The Child Maintenance Service has been awarded a liability order for a fictitious debt. There are many thousands of cases like this one. In your report, I noticed you put the figure of 99.35% on the accuracy of the child maintenance calculations. Are you satisfied that the large number of people saying that there is a fictitious debt are mistaken?
No, we're not satisfied with that. You know, we wouldn't necessarily use the word fictitious. However, it does mean that people are being pursued for debts that there is not the evidence to substantiate that they owe.
Wow. People being pursued for debts that there isn't the evidence that they owe. Does that ring a bell about a recent scandal called the Post Office? I'll be coming back to that. The consequences of this, if parents are chased so hard for amounts that they don't owe are completely incorrect, can be catastrophic. It can lead to prison or, tragically, suicide. Just take a look at this second clip about suicides, again, from the Department of Work and Pensions to a select committee.
When you become aware that a client of the service has taken their life, you carry out an investigation. What comes out of that? I mean, there's an investigation report, I suppose. What do you do with that? Does anything get published? Just talk us through the...
Nothing's published. I mean, the internal review process is more transparent, but we very much just look at the case notes. A lot of the time, we've had no contact with that parent for quite considerable time. So what we're looking for is any involvement of ourselves that could have had an impact. And if we think that's the case, then that's when we would refer it to the department's internal review process. But it's very much us looking at our own interaction with that parent's contact history and determining if we could have done something that may have been the final straw sort of thing.
Well, I don't know what you think about that, but that sounds very much like to me that you're marking your own homework. Probably not a good idea unless you're just sort of practicing for an exam. But if we're talking about something as serious as suicides, surely that should be an external review. Now, I don't know how many suicides may be taking place tragically every year. We're trying to get that information. But you shouldn't mark your own homework on something so serious. Well, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio by two paying parents to talk about the calculation, the appeals process. To review this in more detail, I've got Mark Price on my right and Lee Windsor on my left to talk about this. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen. Mark, I'm going to come to you. So, talk us just through your experience briefly and the sort of the calculations and the process, if you think an error's been made.
Initially, the calculations were made on a date that predates my daughter's birth.
That's the income calculation?
That's the income calculation. So I then queried it. I queried it on a number of occasions, and they just didn't want to listen. They did have my present employer's records, but they didn't want to use those. They used the predated date because there's more money.
Because there's more money. Right, so that essentially is the answer to the question, why would they do that?
I honestly don't know, but the reason I was questioning it was because if they're going to do an accurate assessment, then they should do it on my present earnings.
And the process of questioning it and appealing it if you think in inaccuracy, how does that work? How did that work for you?
It just seemed like a mess. Every time I approached them, I had to go through different legislations, different protocols that they had installed. It wasn't anything that I was aware of, so unless they told me how it worked, I wouldn't know how it worked. So all I could do was just contact them. This is wrong, that's wrong, could you help me out? No, it's too late, you've got to pay this.
And how's this ended up? Because this something happened before Christmas, didn't it?
Yes, so this had gone on for some time now. There was liability orders which were put in place. Apparently it was heard some 200 miles away from where I live. So I didn't have an opportunity to sort of challenge it. I then went on to they went on to put a charging order on my house.
They put a charging order on your house based on calculations
that I believe was incorrect.
You believe was incorrect, and you hadn't had the opportunity to challenge it in court with these liability orders.
That's correct, yeah. I couldn't challenge it in court. I then found out that if you tried to challenge it in court, the court weren't allowed to hear the evidence.
This is extraordinary, the fact that, and we touched on this before, that if you know the calculations are wrong, even if you can prove it in court, surely natural justice would say, well, the judge should say, we need to relook at the calculations, but apparently that's not allowed.
No, they don't do that, no. No.
Absolutely extraordinary. So you've made an application to court, and what did the judge say?
So they put a charging order on the house, then they tried to go for a possession order. I then contested that. I went to court, and the judge said no, he's not going to do that. He's not going to, force the order to go through.
And this is based on calculations that you think are incorrect.
Yes.
Mark, thank you for sharing that with us, and I appreciate it, because this is difficult. It's difficult for people to talk about these issues. Lee, likewise, just sort of explain your story. And I should say, both these gentlemen have served in the armed forces for our country, and frankly, I just think we want calculations to be correct, and the opportunity, if they're wrong, then to rapidly correct them. What's your story, Lee?
I was told that I had overpaid after complaining that the CSA had not taken into account my service invalid and pension, which would have made my assessment to be paid at a flat rate. And they then said I'd overpaid. And then they backdated all the assessments again, whacking on all the arrears of over £18,000.
£18,000 of arrears. And you think that you'd overpaid by how much initially?
£6,000.
£6,000.
Yes. I then challenged that again, went to a tribunal, and the judge said it wasn't in his jurisdiction. and to re-complain to the CMS.
But after the original calculation, the CMS, they admitted an error, didn't they?
They did. They admitted there was an official error, and they had maladministrated my case.
So let's just, I mean, this is really important, where the CMS admitted that overpriced, essentially.
Yes.
Overcalculated by £6,000.
Yes.
But then they sort of reversed that decision.
They did. They reversed the whole assessment back to 2008 at the start of the case.
So if I'm sort of speaking for the other side, what might have gone on at the CMS in order to come back to the calculations and say, we admitted the error, but now we've re-looked at it again, and we think we were right in the first place?
Yeah, so they went to the parental care and got her to put in a variation, which is against their own policy to encourage that to be done.
And the process to appeal, if you think an error has been made, just talk us through this process, because this is the critical point. How does that work? Have you got enough time to put your case as to what the true numbers should be?
Not really, I don't think. No, you've got to go through a mandatory reconsideration, which I did. I obviously went to court and they said I can't, he can't deal with it then. But
because initially there's an appeal, you've got a process to appeal before they go for the liability order, isn't there?
Well, this is a bit different with this case now. So obviously I got a liability order and I went to court, in which I wasn't able to challenge.
You weren't able to challenge the corrections. And this is what they call, I think, Section 33.4, isn't it, from the 1991
That's right,
legislation?
Yes, yeah.
And the barrister, he actually said that it couldn't be challenged in court.
That's right, and he was quite smug when he said that as well.
And look, I mean, so we did actually ask. We wanted to get some representation from the other side, so we did actually ask the barrister in this case whether he'd come on and explain this, because you might think, well, if this is in place, there must be a logical reason, but it's just against all natural justice to not be able to inform a judge, clearly the numbers are wrong, then you need to essentially press the pause button and go back and get the DWP to recalculate, the CMS to recalculate.
That's right, yeah. So I've gone now on to trying to appeal those liability orders, in which I was supposed to go to the Financial Remedies Court, but they don't want to deal with it and they put me back to the CMS.
So it's sort of like a merry-go-round.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. There's no clear path how to appeal.
Mark, were you clear how long you had to correct the numbers, to sort of essentially appeal the numbers?
It wasn't made clear. Apparently they'd sent leaflets and documents, which was like reams of it, which explains the process. But by the time I'd got through that, it's just difficult to read. It's difficult to sort of try and fathom.
And it's not very long. I think it's just a matter of 30 days or so.
30 days, yeah. 30 days.
Which actually, in order to go through the various process, feels like a fairly short period of time. Having said that, obviously, as a non-resident parent, you know, one's got to be paying one's due debts. That's the key point. I think we have got a statement from the Department of Work and Pensions, because we asked them obviously for a comment. They said that child maintenance parents help keep around 160,000 children out of poverty on average each year, and we continue to improve the CMS through automating simple processes and spending more time with vulnerable customers. CMS payments, they go on to say, they're calculated so they're reasonable and affordable for the paying parent, and decisions can be appealed and a court will decide if they are wrong. Really? Similarly, there are appeal rights for paying parents where the CMS intends to take enforcement action. I have to say, I mean, I've read out that statement, but that doesn't feel to match the stories that I'm hearing today, and it doesn't match what I heard and the statement back at the New Year. But we'll keep talking about this. We'll talk about it in the second hour with Charlie Peters, and also a retired solicitor who used to work with and act on cases with the CMS. Gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I know it's not easy, but it's so important so that others actually can talk about it. And if you've got experiences on this, please do get in touch. GBNews, gbviews@gbnews.com. Now, coming up after the break, I'll be sitting down with the one and only Stanley Johnson to discuss his new book about the 700th anniversary of the death of Marco Polo. I might drop in a bit of climate change and what's going on with the farmers in Europe into the discussion. Who knows? You're watching Richard Tice on GB News. It's Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Farage, Monday to Thursday from 7 p.m.
Lots of people have different ideas, but principally a conservative approach to getting growth is to reduce taxes so that people, ordinary people and businesses can spend more of their own money to invest and grow the economy.
So the theory is that you cut taxes and that then pumps more money into the economy.
Exactly right. And then people, it's not government that are creating wealth. It's individuals, businessmen, companies that create wealth. It's the private sector that creates wealth, that the public sector then taxes and spends.
I get the theory, but one of the criticisms of you, and I think one of the criticisms actually of all political parties, is they appear to be incapable of cutting government spending.
That's the key. I mean, and I think when I look back, is that we should have had a credible plan to reduce the increase in spending. Now, that's often a difficult concept to explain.
But it's in line with inflation, etc.
That's all right. So when you're slowing the increase, it means, one year you spend £100 and the next year you spend maybe £101 as opposed to going up to £110. So the actual level isn't going down, but you're slowing the increase. And that's very much what I tried to do. And actually, looking back, the one thing I wish I'd done, was to present a credible spending plan at the same time as the tax cuts that we announced.
You had a go, it didn't work out for whatever reason, and that analysis will go on for some years to come. We have Jeremy Hunt there as Chancellor now, hinting quite strongly now there won't be any tax cuts, but the truth of it is, under 14 years of Conservatives, for a variety of reasons, the tax burden has risen.
That's right.
To the highest since the Attlee government, way back in
80 years,
1951, whatever it is.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to me, Richard Tice, here on GB News this Sunday. Well, this week marks the 700th anniversary of the death of the Venetian merchant and explorer Marco Polo, very famous, of course, best known for chronicling his discoveries on his travels in those famous memoirs that gave Europe one of the best written accounts of Asia, its culture, geography and people. Who better to discuss this than the one and only, very well travelled through Asia and China, Stanley Johnson, former MEP. Stanley, very good morning. Thanks for coming to the studio. So, 700th death commemorating of Marco Polo, but there have been lots of books about him. Don't we know everything? What are you doing? What's going on here?
We certainly don't know everything. I started this, you won't believe this, I started this in 1961. 1961, so I think that is... Oh, God, I can't work it out.
63 years ago.
I did, that's right. We started it then. Tim Severin and I and a cameraman called Michael Larrabee, we set off on 2 motorcycles to travel from Marco Polo's on Marco Polo route. We started in Oxford. Marco Polo didn't start in Oxford. Obviously, he started in Venice. We went to Venice. We went through Turkey. We went through Persia. We went through Afghanistan. We wanted to get into China. We couldn't get into China in 1961. We ran out of time. We had to be back in Oxford. So what I did this summer, when I say this summer, I mean last summer, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
It's still this summer for me. A wonderful TV company called One Tribe TV, working together with Chinese TV as well. It was a brilliant collaboration. That's why Marco Polo is symbolic. We set out, we flew to China. We then went by car to the very, very far west of China, up there in the Himalayas, exactly pretty much where Tim Severin and I left off last time round, and then we followed it on.
And that was where Marco Polo entered China, is that
Pretty
right?
much. Marco Polo actually entered it through a corridor known as the Wakhan corridor, which runs, there's a border between Afghanistan and China, the Wakhan corridor, and that's pretty much where we came in.
Because then China was called Cathay, wasn't it?
Well, Cathay was one of the names.
One of the names.
One of the names for China. But of course, in those days, the interesting thing is that when Marco Polo travelled, it was during the time of the Mongol Emperor and the Mongol Empire. And if you like, Mongols get a bad press, but they'd actually created what's called the Pax Mongolica. It was a time for travel. It was a time for linking East and West, the old Silk Road. Actually, the peace and stability which Mongol rule brought was what enabled Marco Polo to make this journey.
And what was also remarkable was that he actually wrote about the travels of Marco Polo. He dictated them when he was in prison back in Genoa, is that right?
Exactly right. He had dictated them to a fellow prisoner. I think Venice had been in a war with Genoa. Marco Polo, having come back from China, I think he left China in about 1294, something like that, came back to Venice, got involved with the war with Genoa, was in prison, and he dictated these memoirs, which are called, now they're called The Travels of Marco Polo. I think he called it A Description of the World, or something like that, to Risticello.
Extraordinary. And then he became a massive sort of merchant trader, didn't he, trading in gemstones?
All that kind of thing. Probably picked up a few tips on his Chinese thing. And so what I have done now is, as it were, finish off this whole story. Part one, the book I read, the journey I took in 1961. Part two, this summer's journey. It's going to be called In the Travels, In the Footsteps of Marco Polo.
And that part of the book and going to be a sort of film documentary as well?
It's definitely going to be a film. Is absolutely scheduled, I think, for a four-part TV series. I've just
four-part. God, I mean, wow,
4-part TV series. The reason I'm feeling pretty hoarse now is I have just done the voiceover for 55-minute TV segments. So
wow.
You do
something, you lose your voice, something to look forward to. Well, don't lose your voice, because just before we finish, I wanted to touch on, obviously, another big topic, sort of issue is climate change, net zero, and, you know, you've got very strong thoughts on that. But actually, we're seeing quite a shift now. We've got farmers, Stanley, demonstrating across many countries in Europe, in Poland, in Germany, Spain, Netherlands, Wales, down in Dover, against the impact on their livelihoods and on their ability to produce food for our citizens. I mean, this is changing very rapidly, in my view, quite rightly, because this is, actually, these policies are making us as poorer. But what are your thoughts on why are these demonstrations happening? What have the leaders got wrong to lead to this?
I don't know the leaders have got anything wrong. They are trying to get policies across which, to my mind, do need to be put into place. I think that, as you know, I've supported that for a very long time. I worked in the EU, worked for the UN on these issues. What the politicians have not yet done enough is to explain really why they have to do it. And also, I think, there are times when they've got to make it possible for certain groups to go with the flow here. But there has to be an understanding there.
But you can't impose a policy on anybody if it's going to make people a lot poorer, if it's going to destroy their livelihoods. Then don't be surprised if that group of people, in this case the farmers, are saying, hang on, folks, we're producing food, the cost of energy is going through the roof, we can't use the right fertilisers, you're trying to buy our land off us and close us down. I mean, this isn't just one leader in one country messaging, this is across the whole of the EU.
Well, I was pretty heavily involved in writing and helping to implement EU environmental policy. No, the argument here is this. Green policies, green energy policies, green environmental policies, in the end, will be economically productive, so they will generate.
So what's your definition of in the end? Because that's really important.
Well, I say in the end, within 5-10 years. These will come into play. We will find there are huge economic benefits from what's called sustainable development. And yes, groups which are being impacted, for what you said, they're not responsible. Some of them are responsible. Anyhow, groups which are being impacted will as well benefit because the state will have to help them through this. We saw it a bit with insulation.
We keep being told there's a benefit. We keep being told there are green jobs. But actually, the evidence shows the opposite. I mean, you take Port Talbot, 3,000 jobs recently basically ditched on the altar of net zero. There's likely the same in Scunthorpe to sort of build electric arc furnaces. But in Asia, we've just been talking about Asia. They're building new steel generating capacity, for example. They're building blast furnaces. So it feels to me that all the sacrifice is being made here in the West, the pain is being suffered here in the West, and in Asia, they're carrying on being competitive, producing cheap energy to sell us expensive goods.
Well, I will tell you that in the 8 weeks I spent going across China, I would say that they are making a huge effort now to move towards renewable energy. There was not a hill without a windmill on it or a wind turbine. The dams, the solar energy, absolutely extraordinary. And they will benefit and we will benefit. I would say that we actually have to stick this one out, dig in for the long term, get through the election and go on.
You want to stick it out, but basically you want the pain to continue to be suffered by different groups of people, whether it's steel workers in Wales and Scunthorpe, whether it's farmers across the whole of Europe, not just the EU, but ourselves and elsewhere. Why should people suffer that pain when China and India are building hundreds of coal-fired power stations to make cheap energy, cheap goods?
That's not really true, because in China, yes, they are building coal-fired power
stations. So it is true?
Not hundreds. Not hundreds, that's what's not true. And what is really true is that the shift to renewable... No, answer your point, though. I absolutely agree with you. If there are groups which are impacted for things which are not their fault, if you see what I mean, then part of the role of the state is to help those...
But there's no such thing as state money. That's our taxpayers' cash. It's our money.
That's what I mean.
So what you're saying is essentially we've all got to provide extra subsidies to help individual groups.
And where's that money coming from?
But that's, of course, that is the EU model. But that money comes from the taxpayer.
Yeah, but the taxpayer is there because in our model, economic development based on sustainable development is a powerful economic force, and it will generate the resources which will enable...
Will, but it feels like a long time away, and there's a lot of pain. And the point is, the EU model, which you like, is based on subsidies, isn't it? To get to an equilibrium.
Well, that's what they're doing in America at the moment too, with their Inflation Reduction Act. You know, that is, they have said, in order to deal with the climate change thing, we have to get these green energy things going. We have to get the solar energy going, the electric vehicles. We have to follow that route too.
If we get to net zero tomorrow, Stanley, does the climate stop changing?
Well, we certainly won't get to net zero.
But whenever we get to it, right? Does the climate then stop changing?
Well, the climate, the CO2 is still up there in the atmosphere for quite a long time. I think it's hundreds of years. Yeah. Methane will disappear. No, it'll be a very long process for equilibrium to
But the climate changed for billions of years before man-made CO2 emissions. So that climate change will continue for millions of years after many people want to get to net zero emissions.
No, it won't continue at the rate it's going now. At the rate it's going now, you know, we're going to get to 3 degrees plus over industrial level, you know, by the end of the century, or even before.
But Stanley, 3,000 years ago in Yorkshire, it was 2 degrees warmer than it is now. So we've dealt with and adapted to different temperatures. The climate constantly... Surely we're better to adapt. Isn't that going to be more cost-effective than suffer the pain that we've just touched on with farmers and steel groups and others?
Well, everybody's talking about adaptation. I was in Dubai. Adaptation is, you know, absolutely vital.
I want to adapt. I don't want to stop. I don't think you can stop climate change. I think those efforts are futile and going to destroy us and make us poorer and colder.
Well, if you look at the graph, we have certainly increased the level of CO2 in the atmosphere hugely since the beginning of the last century. It can be reversed. We did it with ozone. If you remember, the ozone, when I started in 1976, ozone was a big issue. Well, by limiting the emissions of CFCs, we dealt with those.
I just think that is different. And I think the missing point here is there's no evidence that if you get to net zero, that climate change is going to stop. Indeed, the IPCC's own sixth report says that sea level change, which is one of the big factors, won't stop rising for between 200 and 1,000 years. Aren't we better just to adapt and build a few sea level defences, Stanley?
Well, you can try again. Do you know how much it costs to build the Thames barrier?
A lot.
Billions of pounds.
A lot cheaper than the billions of pounds we're investing in net zero.
No, I don't agree with that.
You don't agree with that? I suspect we may never agree, but it's excellent to talk to you, Stanley. Thank you so much indeed. Fascinating discussion about Marco Polo, that commemoration. We'll look forward to that documentary. That'll be amazing.
It's going to be fun. Look forward to the book too. Launching at the London Book Fair in March.
In March, fantastic. Stanley Johnson, always got a strong view and writes brilliant books. Thank you very much for coming into the studio. Coming up, we have got big changes potentially afoot in the world of football. You've got yellow cards, you've got red cards. Now they want a different colour card, a blue card, sin bins. Really? Is this a good idea? Or should they actually just focus on getting some of the things like VAR right in the first place? I'll be talking to a former Premier League player and a referee. Don't go anywhere. Up next.
Hi, Rishi here. As Prime Minister, I'm focused on delivering on your priorities. So I'll be on the road to join GB News for a special People's Forum on Monday the 12th of February, where I'll be taking questions from a live audience about the issues that really matter to you: the economy, immigration, the NHS. See you there.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There'll be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
When you listen to Nigel Farage's assessment there, do you feel that maybe this is as good as it was going to get, given that we had the pandemic and it was inevitably always going to be a bit of a mixed bag?
Well, I think it's a bit of a poor excuse from Nigel there that they haven't done it properly. The facts are, Nigel, that it's not worked. It's not going to work. Yes, we will rejoin. I mean, are we better off for it? Are they...
Can I jump in there, Charlie? We're going to rejoin under which government? Because Labour aren't going to do that, unless you don't think...
But I mean, it's going to be unavoidable not to join, because I think it's getting worse and worse for us. I mean, let me just say this. Are the NHS better because we're out of Europe? No, they're not, because they're not employing more staff. Is the building trade better off? No. Is travelling abroad or to the EU or staying in the EU, are we better off? No. Are we better off because foods rise because of the EU? No. Are we better off with imports and export? No, because they're taking longer. The overall result is that we're not better off. The killer point here is 57% of the public would now vote to remain. 33% would leave. Surely that's the telling point.
It depends on the pollster, Charlie, because we were talking to a very good pollster earlier who said there's no enthusiasm for any change in a year. Maybe 10 years, they might be thinking about it.
Belinda de Lucia, let's bring you in. I'm sure you want to react to what Charlie said.
I mean, who would have thought that the UK wanting to run its own affairs and making our politicians more accountable would be so revolutionary? EU Parliament voted a majority to get rid of the vetoes, the last remaining scraps of democracy that the EU had. Now, luckily for EU citizens at the moment, you know, it means a treaty change to actually go forward. But that is the mood. The ever closer union. We have dodged a federalised, globalist, international, power-gobbling, anti-democratic organisation, and that's worth more than a few trade and travel perks for a few wealthy people in this country.
Hear, hear. Belinda de Lucia, Charlie Mullins, great to see you both.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to me, Richard Tice, here on GB News this Sunday. Now, football's lawmakers, well, they want to try something different. Possibly sin-binning players, sin-binning, and issuing a different colour card, a blue card. Huge backlashes erupted from fans who think it's going to slow down the game even more, who've lost confidence in the whole VAR system. So will this trial go ahead? First possible major change to the whole world of disciplinary measures since 1970. Yes, work that 54 years ago was the introduction of red and yellow cards were brought in for the World Cup back in Mexico. Well, let's get some thoughts from a former player. Delighted to be joined from Derbyshire by the former Derby, Middlesbrough and Leeds striker Malcolm Christie. Malcolm, a very good morning. Thanks for joining us. So, we've got yellow cards, we've got red cards. Is it a good idea to have a sort of something in the middle just to make the ref's job a bit easier? What do you think to this?
Richard, thanks for having me. Look, I think that the backlash that we've seen from the announcement from the IFAB people, I think that tells everything that you need to know in terms of what the thought process and what the feeling is, certainly from a player's perspective. You know, we're muddying the waters even more with regards to what we've already got. You've already mentioned the issue there about VAR. We've not nailed that anywhere near. I mean, can you imagine this blue card coming out, just the controversies of what it's going to cause? I mean, they might as well call it the grey card, not the blue card, because there'll be that many grey areas and that many issues that potentially this will cause. You think that a player then goes off the pitch. Football's very, very different than what rugby is as an invasion game. You lose a player in rugby, you're really up against it. You're up against the cosh. You know, you're nigh on going to concede a try in that period of time.
But is that
football?
Malcolm, is that not an argument actually to try it in one league or tournament, that actually it works quite successfully in rugby? It's a deterrent for bad behaviour. Why not give it a whirl?
Richard, football changes a lot when you go down to 10 men. It's very different. You almost get 10 players behind the ball, two banks of 4 or 5, or a 5 and a 4, and it's just very difficult. And can you imagine? They'll just be counting the clock down until that player comes back up. The game almost gets killed a little bit when it goes down to 10 men. And I think, again, you think that rugby, and I'm not knocking rugby for that, but I think, you know, you're thinking of bringing this in with these players that paid millions and millions of pounds, you know, being out the game, just sitting about the pitch for 10 minutes, coming back on, having to do a sprint. Can you imagine if there's injuries as a cause, as a result of that? I think what the premise of what they're trying to do is the correct thing and the right way. We need to knock out the dissent, the bad discipline. I understand that, I get that, and I understand that the successes that they've got at lower leagues, at grassroots and levels, brilliant, fine. But there needs to be that education, and just because something works in one area of football, it doesn't mean to say that it will work at the highest level.
Malcolm, pause with me there, because we are, of course, a channel watched and listened to all over the world. From Spain, I've got the former Premier League referee, Mark Housey. Mark, a very good morning. It's almost good afternoon to you down there. Thanks for joining us. So, presumably you'd have been delighted by the blue card that would have helped ensure a little bit less abusive behaviour from players. Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
For me, I think it's a load of nonsense. I really do. You know, you're going to get we've got yellow and red cards. I think absolutely spot on. I think it's going to slow the game right down. If you look at a player that shows dissent, he gets a blue card, he goes off for 10 minutes, he then comes back on, then gets another blue card, then is he sent off for 2 blue cards? So what's the difference? What is the difference?
And you've actually hit on a really important point, Mark, which is slowing the game down, because I know actually at Twickenham yesterday there was some slow handcapping because of the constant reference to too many sort of checks on the videos. There's huge problems in football with the VAR system. Maybe actually they should just focus on getting VAR right.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's so inconsistent, isn't it, in the Premier League, and it's all over the place. And we saw that yesterday with debatable handballs, penalties that should have been given that weren't given, VAR not getting involved when they should and getting involved when they shouldn't. And you know, for me, you know, also you know who's going to it's just making it complicated. So who's going to deal with the 10 minutes? Who's going to keep the timekeeping? Is that player allowed to get back off the bench and then warm up? So, you know, the referees and football officials have got enough to get on there.
I'll go back to Malcolm in Derbyshire. Malcolm, where's this idea come from? Presumably someone thought it was a good idea somewhere.
Well, you've got them. They're trying to cut out dissent, aren't we? We've seen it. I mean, back in my playing days, Mark was a referee when I was playing back in the day. You'd have, you know, players were very, very aggressive in terms of their tone of approach and things like that, which I think that has curtailed certainly from what I was used to as a player. And yes, you've got that other one, that foul where it's like people think it's a little bit more than a yellow, but not quite a red. You know, where someone's running away towards the goal and someone deliberately trips. Yet we all know that that's just in between. But that's, as Mark said, that's what a yellow card is there for. You know, it's not quite a red. I just don't get it. I can't see this ever coming in with the Premier League. I can't see people voting for it. And again, I think that's why the delays come in.
Yeah,
it's like anything. You put a little message out there, don't you? You get that little, just that feel, that
see the response you get. Absolutely. Malcolm, thank you very much indeed. Just finally, Mark, why is the VAR system proving so difficult in football when it works very well in cricket, in tennis, pretty well in rugby union? What is wrong with the VAR system? Why is it so bad in football?
I think if you look when it is, I mean, I think it's what 4 to 5 years now in the Premier League. I think it's the training education. I think the VAR protocol needs a total reform. We've got to take away this clear and obvious error. And when I talk about the training education, as I said earlier, they haven't got no idea of when to come in, when not to come in. They have got no idea of the handball, the phases of play. For if we look at the two handballs yesterday in the Luton game, they are never ever handballs. Their arms are in a natural position for that phase of play. Yeah. And that's the problem we've got. I think we need to get ex-players involved and talk to the referees about natural and unnatural and
I think that's right. You've hit it on the head, Mark. We need ex-players like Malcolm and ex-refs like you doing it, seems to me. Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. I think football needs to get VAR right before thinking of anything else. Former ref and a former player completely against this blue card system. Lots more to come up on the show. Up next, we're going to be talking about all things royal and get the latest on the King's health. You're watching Richard Tice here on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Rishi here. As Prime Minister, I'm focused on delivering on your priorities. So I'll be on the road to join GB News for a special People's Forum on Monday the 12th of February, where I'll be taking questions from a live audience about the issues that really matter to you: the economy, immigration, the NHS. See you there.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Camilla Tominey Show, Sunday mornings from 9:30.
I appreciate the story isn't in today's papers, but it has been running all week, and it's this row over the use of nitrogen hypoxia to kill this man who was on death row in Alabama.
Yeah.
And it's been linked back to you, and I wanted to ask you about it because this is intriguing, because you did a television show back in 2015 where you, I believe, tested this method of execution. Just tell me briefly about it, Michael. What happened?
I didn't test this method of execution, and it was a bit longer ago than that. But what I did do was test hypoxia. So I tested various ways in which people are killed in the United States, and asked the question as to whether there was a more humane way of doing it. So I was put into hypoxic situations, for example, into a chamber run by the Netherlands Air Force, which simulated what happens if you're in an aircraft at 30,000 feet and suddenly the windows blow out. And what happened to me was that I was almost instantly rendered incapable. As an experiment, I was trying to play with children's toys, putting triangle shapes into triangle spaces, and I was quickly unable to do that. I was asked, what is 9 minus 5? And I said 5. And then the officer who was with me, the Air Force officer who was wearing an oxygen mask, said to me, Michael, put your mask on or you will die. And I was incapable of putting my own mask on. Now, this suggested that hypoxia was very fast acting.
Yeah.
And that you had... Obviously, I was in no pain or anything like that. I was just completely unaware. By the way, this is why, if you're on an aircraft and it depressurizes, you must put your own mask on first.
But of course, I can't go on and draw conclusions.
No.
We did not experiment with nitrogen. But what I can say is it was evident to me that hypoxia renders you incapable almost instantaneously.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. Well, I'm standing in for Michael Portillo this morning. We've been discussing child maintenance service. We're going back to that in the second hour. But it's National Inventor Day. I asked you what would you like to invent, and you've been in touch, and it's great. Thank you very much for your thoughts. Michael would like a laser gun that zaps mosquitoes, is easy to aim, zaps them all, whether they're in view or out of view. Don't know whether he wants that to be fun or not. He doesn't actually say. Alan says, there's only one thing I'd like to invent, and that's a truth drug. It would solve a lot of today's problems in the country. Quite an interesting thought, actually, that. I suspect Alan may be referring to politicians. Who knows? Mark says, this is fun. I'd like to invent a time machine that takes us back to the 1980s when we had a great leader, cost of living was affordable, and the music was brilliant. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Keep those coming. We'll go to some more of those later on. Now, of course, the King this week just gone has just started his treatment for his cancer diagnosis, and he's now at Sandringham. So just delighted to be joined by former royal correspondent from The Sun, Charlie Ray, to get the latest. Charlie, very good morning. What's the latest update?
Well, we've seen the King this morning. He has appeared at church with the Queen, which is as usual. It really is business as usual, bearing in mind that he's got to rest and he's going to have this cancer treatment. So it's great to see him this morning. There's a few well wishers there, and he's cheered them. And we've had an announcement this morning that the King has said thank you very much. Both he and the Queen are very touched by the amount of good wishes he's had, and he says it's the greatest comfort to him and the Queen, and he heartened that sharing. His diagnosis has shone a light on the organisations like the NHS helping patients who are going through all sorts of problems.
Absolutely right. And Charlie, would you expect a rolling update of his treatment, or would that pretty much be it?
No, I don't think we're going to get a blow by blow every day what's going on. We do know that he's due to either see physically the Prime Minister next week at the usual session, or do it by video link. He's expected back in London, I think, to continue the cancer treatment. I think there's another day he's going back for some treatment, and then it's going to be back very much to Sandringham for rest and recuperation. But behind the scenes, he's still working. He's still doing all these red boxes. He's still writing all these letters. The Queen, on the other hand, is trying to get him to rest a little bit more than normal.
He's a workaholic, isn't he?
He is a workaholic, which is very, very difficult. But I think the King is not daft. He realises that he's in a battle, and he wants to win that battle, and quite rightly so.
Absolutely. But meanwhile, the Prince of Wales, he's going to be taking up a greater sense of duties. I mean, the pressure on the Prince of Wales now is growing hugely, isn't it, Charlie?
It is, and as I understand it, Kensington Palace and Buckingham Palace are actually looking at various diaries and various events that the Prince of Wales can take on. But let's not forget, it's not just the Prince of Wales, there is the Queen as well. Her workload will be increasing, and there's always, and I don't mean this derogatory term, there's always Edward and Sophie. They've been doing a fine job as well in this new slimmed-down monarchy. And of course, there is the ever-brilliant Princess Anne, who just seems to be another workaholic.
Charlie, thank you so much indeed for that. Coming up, we're going to be going back to the Child Maintenance Service and also talking about that Tucker Carlson interview with President Putin. But first, it's the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Quite a misty, murky start for some of us today, but the theme generally is that skies will be brightening. Low pressure is still around, and these weather fronts around at times will be bringing showers, some spells of rain, but in between those fronts there will be elements of something a little bit sunnier and brighter. You can see where those showers are around first thing this afternoon, particularly into areas of eastern England and the far north-east of Scotland, staying very wet here. Showers quite frequent across western areas of Scotland into Northern Ireland as well, but some brighter spells around at times, so do enjoy those sunnier spells where you do get them. Temperatures around 8 to 12 degrees Celsius, not doing too badly for the time of year. It will stay very wet across Shetland right throughout this evening, a very breezy night to come here as well. Showers always quite persistent for western areas of Scotland, actually turning wintry over the higher ground here, even across higher ground areas of Northern Ireland and Northern England throughout the night as well. But some clearing skies in there as well, and underneath those clearing skies, temperatures will take a little bit more of a tumble compared to some recent nights, down to low single figures for many of us, and a patchy frost and some icy stretches are possible first thing in the morning. Monday then turns into a day of sunshine and showers, those showers always most frequent and heaviest further towards the northwest. Areas further east and south could stay largely dry throughout the day, a decent number of sunny spells in there and quite a pleasant one. Temperatures again generally around 6 to 11 degrees Celsius. Enjoy those sunnier spells where you do get them though, because cloud is looking like it will stretch its way back in for the middle part of next week. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain's election channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. Weekdays from midday.
Francis, Just Stop Oil have in the past broken the law. I remember distinctly the Dartford crossing. That ended up with 2 jailed, I believe, if I remember correctly. Is it ever justified in your view?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I mean, I would have to say yes. I mean, we're trying to preserve my life, your lives, the lives of your family, and it's not just the planet that we're trying to protect, it's the lives of millions of people. And, you know, we know from history that we have to break the law in order to put pressure on the government and to be listened to.
No one would doubt your sincerity in your views. You genuinely believe in what you fight for. But there are others who think differently. For example, there are Islamist extremists who believe that people will go to hell unless they convert to Islam. They will sincerely, perhaps, break the law in order to force people to convert. In their view, they might be saving people's lives for eternity. There might be abortion activists who say that babies are being murdered and to save their lives we need to break the law to stop people having abortions. Why do you get to say that your moral conviction is the one that's right and other people's individual moral conviction are those that are wrong?
So what's really integral to the Just Stop Oil campaign is the fact that it is a non-violent campaign. That's what separates us from the examples that you've just given. We're absolutely dedicated non-violence, both as a tactic and as a principle. So though we might be breaking the law...
If individuals take it upon themselves to break the law for whatever their course is, surely the way that we decide what society wants in general is democratic and within the law.
Well, of course, we know also that protest is absolutely integral to maintaining and upholding a democracy, and in particular, non-violent protest. I mean, I really can't express to you how severe this situation is, and I'm sure you know this.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So, send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to me, Richard Tystaney, for Michael Portillo. Well, we're heading into the second hour of the show. We've got the child maintenance service issues. Lots of you getting in touch on that. Really interested on your thoughts on that. We've also got a discussion about the Tucker Carlson and President Putin interview. What does that really mean for the West? And yes, it's National Pizza Day celebrations. We're going to be cooking pizzas here in the studio. The producers are excited. But first of all, let's get you up to date with your latest headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Richard, thank you very much and good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Defence Secretary is said to be furious over the Ministry of Defence's diversity and inclusivity policy. It's been reported in today's Telegraph the Army wants to relax security clearance vetting for overseas recruits to boost diversity and inclusion. Grant Shapps told the Sunday Telegraph that he's ready to go to battle over the matter and has ordered a review. He's warned there will be no lowering of security clearance requirements on his watch. According to the paper, the UK's armed forces are looking overseas because they've reportedly failed to hit recruitment targets. Fujitsu is set to have received more than £3.4 billion through contracts from Treasury-linked organisations despite its role in the Post Office scandal. The Commons Treasury Committee says Fujitsu was awarded around £1.4 billion worth of deals since the High Court ruling in 2019, concluding there'd been numerous failings in its Horizon IT system. £2 billion worth of contracts were also agreed before 2019 and remained active thereafter. A group of MPs wrote to organisations, including HMRC, the Financial Conduct Authority and the Bank of England, to demand details of their agreements with Fujitsu. The committee said all three have spent considerable sums with them. 2 people have been arrested after an 8-year-old child was seriously injured in the suspected XL bully attack. The dog had bitten the child's head in Merseyside yesterday afternoon. The boy has had emergency surgery, remains in a serious but stable condition. Doctors say his injuries are life-changing. Officers seized the dog, which they believe to be an XL bully. A 49-year-old woman and a 30-year-old man, have been arrested. They're not related to the child. The Housing Secretary is warning young people shut out of the UK's housing market could turn to authoritarianism. Michael Gove says a failure by the government to tackle the housing crisis could harm democracy as well as the Conservatives' chances at the next general election. In an interview with The Times, he says the traditional route for young people to work hard and get on the housing ladder has gone. Gove criticised Labour for, he says, continuously rejecting housing policies.
The difference between a party saying that its policy is pro-builder, not blocker, and then when we bring things forward, every single Conservative MP, every single Conservative I know backed our proposals for new homes, and Labour were whipped to a man and woman against it. So this is not about individuals, this is about a party that makes big claims, and yet, as we see time after time, it turns turtle. And that's why Keir Starmer is the jellyfish of British politics. He's transparent, spineless, swept along by the tide.
Kwasi Kwarteng says immigration must be a key focus for the government when it comes to having success at the next election. The former Chancellor also told GB News' Camilla Tominey his decision to not stand for re-election as an MP is one he's been considering for a while.
Thinking about it for a long time.
Have you? How long?
And there was, well, ever since the beginning of the Parliament, actually. I had thought, and I was Minister of State at that point, I had thought that, 3 terms, obviously we had more elections, but 15 years is probably, in this modern climate, a reasonable amount of time to be an MP. 2 of the principal things that Conservatives should be fighting for are lower taxes and secure borders, strong on immigration, and strong on taxes.
Well,
and
would
if
you
look
like
at
to see an immigration cap?
Yes, I mean, there's got to be something on it. I mean, on 2 of those metrics, we haven't, frankly, performed very well.
No.
And the King has attended church in Sandringham for the first time since his cancer diagnosis. His Majesty walked alongside Queen Camilla and waved to well-wishers. Last night, King Charles thanked the nation for their overwhelming support in his first public message since the diagnosis announcement. The monarch said such kind thoughts are the greatest comfort and encouragement. Buckingham Palace has said he's facing a form of cancer unrelated to his recent prostate treatment. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Thank you, Tatiana, and good afternoon. Yes, I'm standing for Michael Portillo, excuse me, for this show until 1 o'clock, and then the brilliant Dawn Neeson will be taking you forward after that. You've been getting in touch because it's National Invention Day. I wanted some form of duster and hoover to get rid of wokery. And I'll be talking about that in the armed forces. You just heard it on the news there. Unbelievable what is still going on. We've had some great messages. Keep them coming in. I'll go through some of them through the rest of the hour. John says John would like a time machine to go back to old England when it actually felt like England. That was John. That reminds me of the other one about the 1980s and a great leader. Lots and lots of thoughts. Also, many of you getting in touch, and I really do appreciate this, about the child maintenance stories, your own examples on either sides of this really important issue that I don't think is talked about enough, because we want a system that works, that's accurate, that ensures parents pay for their responsibilities, but also doesn't actually prejudice and penalise and send people to prison or far worse. We'll be talking shortly to Charlie Peters about some of those stories that have come in. We're also just going to look at this issue of liability orders, because those are the orders that essentially, that's the legal ruling for payments to take money from a paying parent's account. And I've got a clip here about how they now raise these liability orders in bulk. Just take a look at this.
Are you ironing out with systemic delays? The liability order that I talked about earlier, which is the legal recognition of a debt, is legislative for us. You know, and that requires you to take that to court. HMCTS have been fantastic in working with us, and I think the report reflects that. In moving to digital courts, where we take bulk liability orders, 100, 200 at a time, to speed things up rather than individual court appearances. So we are making progress on the liability order part of the process. Sanctions, unfortunately, is a personal appearance in court. Again, we keep working closely with the court service to see if we can speed that up. But some of it is legislated, and we can't get away from the fact that you need a liability order to move forward.
So you need a liability order to move forward, and that's fine. But we want these things to be accurate. That absolutely is a key thing. Otherwise, you end up with errors on either side of it, and we've got lots of messages coming in. And it seems that under some new legislation that's come in, you don't even need to go to court now for these liability orders. But that's the question. If the calculations are patently wrong, where's the redress? Where does this actually stop? Just take a look at this clip again from a select committee.
And so this bill makes important improvements to CMS enforcement processes by amending existing powers. Once commenced, this will allow the Secretary of State to make an administrative liability order where the paying parent has failed to pay an amount of child maintenance without the need to make an application to court.
Well, there we are. So applications don't need to go to court. And some might say that improves the administration, makes it quicker and faster to ensure that non-resident paying parents pay. And that's fine, as long as it's accurate. Well, joining me now is a retired solicitor who's got experience of working with the CMS, Richard Visick. Richard, thank you for joining me this afternoon on this important issue. Just tell us about your experience of working with the CMS. Obviously, it's a big department, it's a very important issue. What's your experience of your sense of their ability to get things right?
Well, what you've just shown with your earlier interview with Mark and Lee just shows exactly the sort of problems happen on a very wide scale indeed. And obviously, I'm very sorry to hear the story you showed earlier with that. And obviously, the latest changes they're making are going to make the situation even worse, because it's going to give the CMS the power to actually issue, a bit like the post office, you know, they can actually be prosecutors and then carry out administrative liability orders very quickly, without the ability, as you said, saw earlier, with the challenging of the actual calculation. So that's highly unfair on the people like your Mark and Lee earlier today. I mean, just on Mark and Lee, I'm very happy to write a letter in connection with that if they have these problems in the future, obviously likely to do with the way the CMS is. And in connection with this programme. Also, I would like to thank yourselves at the Reform Party for actually voicing these concerns, because usually when I take part in these consultation papers, no one at all actually seems to be writing in on a professional basis, if that makes sense. A lot of people of us in the profession are actually quite scared, to be honest.
Really? So when you say that, scared because you're dealing with a government department or because of future work? Why would people be scared?
It's both of those things, really, because at the end of the day, there's quite a lot of pressure not to do that. So it is even I'm actually feeling scared as I speak now, to be honest. Yeah.
I mean, Richard, well, I'm hugely grateful that you have come on to talk about it. And, when you are nervous of that, I think whistleblowing, it's really important, because at the end of the day, we all just want to get this right. We want the calculations to be accurate, to people to pay promptly. And I think all of us who pay taxes, and we just want the government departments to get stuff organised. And when you touched on it, I used the same concerns about another post office scandal. It feels to me that we've got to put pressure, and we've got to have the courage to call out this department, to say, come on, folks, you surely can do a lot better than this.
Absolutely. There's nowhere for people like Mark and Lee to go, and the idea of having to travel miles and miles for a court hearing only being given a month, which, quite frankly, even as a solicitor, it's actually very hard to actually do that and work out what to do with an appeal process. That's very nerve-wracking as well, quite frankly, especially when it's completely unfair and wrong in its calculations. So there are definitely problems in that area. And
I think that's right. And indeed, Mark and Lee, they were nervous talking about it here in the studio. I'm incredibly grateful they did. And just finally, Richard, there's the ability to change a calculation. How does that work? And is that sensible and fair if your income has changed?
It's very, very difficult, because you get 25%. If your income goes down by 25% or more, then they will change it. But it takes 3 months plus extra time of processing. So effectively, you have someone who's down 24%, let's say, there's no change in the income, which is very, very difficult for people in that situation. And worse than that, the CMS is tightening up on enforcement at the moment and broadening its reach generally. And at the same time, it's not actually given access for other people who are in the position, Mark and Lee, to say, well, my expenses have gone up. As we know, inflation has rocketed, interest rates have got, those are not even taken into consideration. So you've got a horrific cocktail there of problems for people facing this situation in the CMS.
And on the other side of it, Richard, in your experience, because already we're getting lots of comments coming in, there are people on the other side who are saying that their former partner haven't paid for years, and the CMS says there's nothing they can do about it. It feels to me it's like neither side is happy in this.
It's a difficult problem, obviously, but the problem about enforcing too hard is, in certain cases I've seen, quite often they are wrong about the calculations. They don't give, even when someone wants to pay and can pay, they actually just suddenly go off and put a garnishee order against the employer to get the money out, which damages their reputation. So they're very, very aggressive with the CMS. And I think they should be almost working with the actual paying parent, for example, to give them more chance to look at how they can reschedule debts and actually even write off debts. But this money isn't going to be got from the CMS the way they're actually trying to do it.
So that's a key point. So finally, Richard, almost like, could you not have like an interim payment while the calculations are being clarified and got exactly right? At least if an interim payment was agreed faster, that might be a sort of halfway house compromise solution.
I think it's a very good idea, but the CMS are very hard to get hold of. So it was on something like where Mark and Lee were there. There's actually very hard for them to get in touch with somebody who can actually make those decisions, or even actually to deal with their queries, so to speak. I mean, it's actually hard to even get a balance on the computer on your CMS account.
Sounds like hard to talk to any
post office, to be honest, yeah.
It's hard to talk to anybody down any sort of outsourcing service or anything, HMRC or whatever. Richard Visick, thank you so much as a retired solicitor for joining us and sharing that. And as Richard said, actually, also nervous himself about talking about this. Charlie Peters is joining me in the studio. I mean, this is a big topic. There's obviously lots of different sides to it. You've heard there from Richard, who's sort of nervous about talking about it. But we're getting loads and loads of people writing in, including, I think you've got a couple of examples, Charlie, people where they've sort of clarified what's due but not being paid.
That's right. It's interesting to hear Richard saying that he is concerned about the wide scale of so many of these problems on the same day that the government is announcing its response to a consultation to bring in more enforcement powers and actually speeding up the enforcement process. So as we understand it, that's going to go from 6 months to 6 weeks. That's the government's aim. And within that, all sorts of figures are being bandied around today. We've heard in the week that some 78,000 parents are not paying in full the amount that's owed. And today the government is saying that 10,000 parents are refusing to pay whatsoever.
So these are massive numbers. 10,000 refusing to pay, nearly 80,000 where the number's clearly not quite right. Huge, huge numbers. And yet the government's going to get more aggressive with enforcement. But if you can't make the calculations right, then, I mean, is the idea of having an interim payment, or maybe that already happens?
Well, the question for the government, I think, today, from many paying parents and from the people we've been speaking to, is that how can you be sure that of those 78,000 or 10,000, many are not facing false debts and false arrears that have been put on them due to a punitive measure to take more cash from them with false calculations. This is the allegation that we're hearing. And to hear also some of the plans the government is making within that process. We know that they can disqualify driving licences, to take charging orders on homes. Earlier in the week, this week in the Commons, Therese Coffey said that curfew orders should be to put on paying parents.
So the government seems to be looking at it on one side, and you touched on the sort of the inflation of arrears. Let's just take a look. I think we've got one more clip of a select committee about the deliberate exaggeration of sums due. Let's just take a look.
There's some severe question marks over the figure of 3.8. I think that the work that the department has done, CMEC has done, identifies that going back many years, we used to create something called an interim maintenance arrangement. Essentially, it was a number that was brought up to say to the non-resident parent, this is how much you'll have to pay. Actually used as a bit of a lever when they wouldn't give us their pay and information, which we have to ask for. So actually, it was inflated. It seems to be inflated by about 300%. So when they didn't pay, all those numbers have gone into the arrears. So the truth is actually those arrears are somewhat inflated because of the tools that were used, up to 18 years ago.
I mean, that's pretty shocking that they're deliberately inflating arrears to encourage people to pay. And yet, I'm going to read again the Department of Work and Pensions response on this, because they think that it all seems to be accurate. They say child maintenance payments help around 160,000 children out of poverty each year, and they continue to improve the CMS through automating simple processes and spending more time with vulnerable customers. Well, I have to say, that doesn't seem to be the experience so far, but we could be being a bit too selective. They also go on to say CMS payments are calculated to be reasonable, affordable for the paying parent, and decisions can be appealed and a court will decide if they're wrong. Well, I don't think that's right, because the court doesn't decide if they're wrong. The court just approves the liability orders. I'll keep on reading their statement, which says there are appeal rights for paying parents when the CMS intends to take enforcement action. It does feel, Charlie, finally, a bit of a mess that needs sorting out. Otherwise, we're going to end up like another post office scandal.
And so many parents have been speaking to GB News over the last couple of months about their experiences here, about their failure to get answers, about their failure to get the information they need and the clarification on the debts they know. And frankly, what they are saying is a failing bureaucracy that is not responding to their concerns, and that has a detrimental impact on their livelihoods and their mental health. And we've heard some really appalling and very worrying testimony along those lines.
We have, and so it's vital just to get it right, so that the due payments can be made promptly and swiftly. And we said, parents must live up to their responsibilities for their children. For sure, we get that. But it does feel to me that this is a real mess. And it feels to me, from the DWP's statement, what concerns me is they don't seem to really be recognising that there's lots of errors, just ploughing on with ever greater enforcement. And I spoke to two relatives where tragically there were suicides in their family. I know, Charlie, you're going to keep abreast of this. Look at the many comments coming in. I really do appreciate it. Please do keep those thoughts, experiences coming in from both sides of it, including where actually the sum is agreed, but the parent isn't paying. Charlie Peters, an important topic that we at GB News will keep abreast of. Thank you very much indeed. Well, I touched on earlier about wokery. I want to invent something that gets rid of it. I'll be discussing that, and also a worrying report about the armed forces. Oh dear, oh dear. More and more diversity and inclusion officers. I'd like armed forces that actually defend us. I don't need diversity officers, even when troop numbers are dangerously low. Don't go anywhere.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Lee Anderson's Real World, Fridays from 7 p.m.
Dr. Jane Jones, who's the clinical lead for Care After Combat.
Yeah.
Jane, thanks for coming. And just tell me a little bit about your organisation. What do you do?
OK, well, thank you for having me here so we can talk about Care After Combat. So we are an organisation, a charity, who work into the prison system, working with military veterans who've somehow got involved with the justice system and...
So there's quite a high population of ex-servicemen and women in our prisons. Why is that, do you think?
So 2014, the government did a review of who was resident in UK prisons, and what they found were that military veterans are the highest occupational group, and this obviously raises some concerns. Yeah. So the government wanted to do something about that, and so they supported Care After Combat initially just as a scoping exercise, really, to see if there was any way we could help these men and women actually, you know, understand the problems that led to offending behaviour and go on to lead successful lives.
So what sort of offending behaviour are we talking typically for people that's in prison that's actually served in our armed forces?
Primarily, it's violence.
Yeah.
So that is the highest offence that we work with.
Okay.
But of course, the military, as with everybody else, it's the full range of offending behaviour.
OK, so we're in a pub, Jane, Dr. Jane, and I guess for some people, you know, the odd tip of alcohol is good, a bit of fun of a weekend, relax, let your hair down. But for some people, alcohol is not always their best friend, and I guess that plays a part in some of your veterans that end up inside.
Yeah. Absolutely. So, speaking from my own experience, a good 2/3 of the people I work with have some kind of mental health problem or mental health difficulty, struggling to either adapt into civilian life or with some of the traumas they've experienced during service. People might self-medicate with alcohol to manage some of those thoughts and feelings.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Have a great Saturday night with me, Leo Curse, on the Saturday Night Showdown. It's a crazy world out there, so come and make fun of it with me, my panel of comedians, and a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about. This Saturday Night Showdown is your front row ticket to the clown show, every Saturday, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, my friends. Well, you have been getting in touch, and I'm very grateful indeed, both on the inventions, but also on what we've been talking about on the Child Maintenance Service, where Ruth says it's great to see GB News tackling the very unfair CMS and hope it'd give hope to many. It does need deeper investigation, Ruth says. So hopes this goes on because it seems really difficult to expose what's going on. Greta says that the system is completely broken, and I've been trying to sort it out with them since last October. So there is that. And we've got to... then Greta goes on to say, it took me to escalate a claim twice before anything was actually done. And even now, it hasn't been sorted completely. So there we are. Now, inventions. There we are on inventions. Rod says, I'd suggest a method in which you could capture and harness lightning strikes worldwide. That's an interesting idea. And then capture the immense energy source to power our homes. Fascinating. Adrian says, I'd like to invent a revolution, a system never seen before, a system that can make accurate calculations regarding the CMS. There we go. A very nice merger there, Adrian, of that. William says, I'd like to invent a Parliament time machine, get everyone there to learn about Parliament who get things done. Well, talking of getting things done, I think it's fair to say that the Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, is not very happy. In fact, he's reported to be furious that the British Army wants to relax security checks. This is I mean, how can you relax security checks for recruits from overseas to boost diversity and inclusion? At the same time, there's another report out in one of the newspapers this morning that the various armed forces, they've got over 40 diversity, inclusion and equality staff, costing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, in fact, millions of pounds every year, when there's a recruitment crisis for real armed forces personnel who are actually going to defend us. Well, I'm delighted to be joined down the line by Major General Chip Chapman to discuss this. Chip, what's going on here? I mean, we want our armed forces to defend us. We don't need to lower recruitment standards and diversity, do we?
No, we don't. It's like all these things, it's where this fits into fighting power. The first thing is you can't lower the security standards because security protection is, protective security is a responsibility, not a mission. And that is on 3 levels. The first level is a basic check. The second level is a security check. And the third level is develop vetting. Now, if you've got a foreign malign force, which is up to espionage and subversion, what you don't want to do is give people access to the crown jewels and the secrets of the country. Now, those who initially come in, of course, don't. They would not go through the develop vetting process. That would be when you were higher up the chain of command. But you cannot compromise on the security. You cannot lower that in the way that, for example, you might lower physical standards or intellectual standards. So that is a red line. You just cannot compromise on that.
But Chip, it seems such an obvious red line. I mean, where's this coming from? Who's saying this? It's hard to believe that senior military officers kind of gone woke themselves to come up with this nonsense.
No, I don't think they probably have. I think this will probably get quietly thrown into File 13. It won't come to any fruition. It's quite clear in the joint service programs what the security standards are, and I don't see those being compromised. I think on the diversity officers, I don't think really it should matter if there are people who are looking at ethnic minority and women's campaigns as initiatives, as long as it is value for money and the output is there, that you're getting people in who conform to the notion of fighting power, that is that the team and the task come before the individual. Now, research in America, certainly at the National Training Center, has said that kind of diversity doesn't really matter by itself, because what really matters in the army is vertical cohesion between leader and led and horizontal cohesion between the team. That is what you expect people to join on because of the standards and values to do with selfless commitment, loyalty, courage, discipline, respect for others, and integrity. If you break that, either due to relationship conflicts or task conflicts or identity conflicts, that the individual comes before the task or the team, then you shouldn't be in the army anyway.
I'm sure that's right. I mean, it just feels to me that the time, energy, effort and resource focusing on this, I'd rather actually focus, for example, on getting procurement right or actually getting the recruitment process right. I mean, I gather that recruitment is way below targets. That's where the energy and effort should be, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think there's a fair point on that. Both recruitment and retention need to be better. The key thing about recruitment is it needs to be more agile than it is, because Gen Z, those who want to join, generally are said to have an 8-second filter. If they're not engaged by something, they move on. And if you've got a process which takes 150 days from when you say you want to join to getting in, a lot of them will move on because that is a long time to wait.
How many days, Chip?
It can be as long as 150 days with the recruiting process.
So let's call that, give or take, 6 months. I mean, a young person who's thinking of going to the armed forces, they're going to go elsewhere in 6 months. I mean, I'd be looking at 6 days, not 6 months, for heaven's sake.
That's right. And the sort of technical definition of agility is responsiveness, adaptability, and we need to be more responsive and more adaptable in that part of the recruitment process. That is absolutely a given from anyone with half a brain cell.
Chip Chapman, thank you so much indeed, Major General Chip Chapman, for your thoughts there. I think we do need to employ a lot of brain cells, please. That's Chip Chapman. Don't go anywhere, folks. We'll be discussing the Tucker Carlson interview with Vladimir Putin up next. But first up, it's Tatiana Sanchez with the news.
Richard, thank you and good afternoon. Your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Defence Secretary is said to be furious over the Ministry of Defence's diversity and inclusivity policy. It's been reported in today's Telegraph that the Army wants to relax security clearance vetting for overseas recruits to boost diversity and inclusion. Grant Shapps told the Sunday Telegraph that he's ready to go to battle over the matter and has ordered a review. He's warned there'll be no lowering of security clearance requirements on his watch. According to the paper, the UK's armed forces are looking overseas because they've reportedly failed to hit recruitment targets. Fujitsu is set to have received more than £3.4 billion through contracts from Treasury-linked organisations despite its role in the post office scandal. The Commons Treasury Committee says Fujitsu was awarded around £1.4 billion worth of deals since a High Court ruling in 2019 concluding there'd been numerous failings in its Horizon IT system. £2 billion worth of contracts were also agreed before 2019 and remained active thereafter. A group of MPs wrote to organisations including HMRC, the Financial Conduct Authority and Bank of England to demand details of their agreements with Fujitsu. The committee said all three have spent considerable sums with them. 2 people have been arrested after an 8-year-old child was seriously injured in a suspected XL bully attack. The dog bit the child's head in Merseyside yesterday afternoon. The boy has had emergency surgery and remains in a serious but stable condition. Doctors say his injuries are life-changing. Officers seized the dog, which they believe to be an XL bully. A 49-year-old woman and 30-year-old man have been arrested. They're not related to the child. And the King has attended church in Sandringham for the first time since his cancer diagnosis. His Majesty walked alongside Queen Camilla and waved to well-wishers. Last night, King Charles thanked the nation for their overwhelming support in his first public message since the diagnosis announcement. The monarch said such kind thoughts are the greatest comfort and encouragement. Buckingham Palace has said he's facing a form of cancer unrelated to his recent prostate treatment. For the latest stories, sign up to GB News Alerts by scanning the QR code on your screen or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Big news, big debates, big opinion. Patrick Christie's Tonight is the week's biggest show. Every weekday, 9 to 11 p.m, we've got the inside track on the day's top stories. There'll be sharp takes you won't get anywhere else. We will set the news agenda, not just follow it, and I want to bring you along for the ride. Whatever it is, we'll have our finger on the pulse. It's news, but it's this close to entertainment. Patrick Christie's Tonight, 9 to 11 p.m, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast. Every day from 6 a.m.
So the highway code was amended recently. Passed me by, but anyway, a new poll suggests this has made no difference to the safety of road users, and I could believe that.
Yeah, there was an awful crash in London, wasn't there? A bus and a pedestrian yesterday.
Fatality.
So we're asking, is the highway code fit for purpose, or should we just scrap it altogether? That's our debate this morning, and we're joined by Danny Kelly. She argues highways are not fit for purpose, and cycling instructor Anna Hughes thinks they are. Good morning to you both.
You see, Anna, I think it's a good thing. I think the highway code is a good thing. I just don't think that any of us pay any attention to it, or we should all be tested on it quite regularly, I would have thought. We should have revision courses in it.
Yeah, I think you just summed it up, Eamon, by saying the changes passed you by. I actually asked a few of my fellow cyclists and pedestrians, what is classified as vulnerable road users, about this very thing. I said, has the new highway code made things safer for you? And most people said, not at all. Drivers don't know what it is. They don't know what the changes are. They probably don't know what the rules are to start with. And as you've just said, doing refreshers is a really good idea. It's a bit bizarre that we're given a license to operate this quite dangerous machinery, and then we're never tested again, and especially not on the highway code, which is, especially when it changes, why wouldn't we be retested on that or have to do refresher courses on it? You know, there are conflicts on the road, there are fatalities. It makes sense to be aware of what the highway code says, because it is there to keep us safe.
Yeah, and Danny Kelly, when I think back, I think it was 1999 I passed my driving test. Hardly any bikes on the road then, to be honest, probably virtually none.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria DiPiero, bringing you
PMQ's Live here on GB News. Every Wednesday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions when Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer go head-to-head in the House of Commons.
We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQ's Live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Welcome back to the last half hour of the show. I'm standing in for Michael Portillo during this week. Now, we've got more views on various things here, which we really do appreciate. Matthew says on the army, his son was kept on hold by the outsourcing agent that was doing the recruitment for 2 years during his application to join the army, and surprise, surprise, he gave up in the end. Very sad, especially as Matthew is a veteran. I heard it there from Chip. I don't want 2 years. I want 6 days. I want someone from the forces, you know, maybe a veteran to do the recruitment. That way you motivate young people, get them in whilst they're excited. Get on with it. Don't wait 2 years. It's insanity. On CMS, Jan says, it seems to me that illegal immigrants are now allowed numerous appeals at great cost to the taxpayer, and yet people are being hounded by the CMS and not able to take their case to a judge even once. That's a great, great thought, Jan. I mean, it really is. Again, it's just not right. It's just incompetent, feels to me. And Susan says, with regard to Stanley and Johnson making shed loads of money out of the green agenda scam, it's all about the money. Susan's not happy about that. Susan says it's more about the transfer of wealth and the poorest will suffer. I agree with you, Susan. I am not happy about it at all. Now, some of you may have seen the interview that was aired a couple of days ago by Tucker Carlson with Vladimir Putin. Quite extraordinary, went on for a couple of hours or so. And the Russian president said the invasion was necessary, really, to prevent Ukraine from posing a threat to Russia. Lots of other things were discussed. I'm delighted to be joined down the line by Martin Wittock to discuss this. Martin is a former Soviet historian and author. Martin, a very good afternoon to you. This interview, I mean, I guess on the one hand, journalism is about asking people on both sides of a debate, getting both sides of a story, and Tucker Carlson obviously very pleased with himself that he got that. But what were your thoughts to what appeared to many a very softball interview with very softball questions?
Well, two things strikes one from this interview. The first is it shows the quite remarkable pivot of the MAGA Republican wing of the Republican Party away from distrust of Russia and projecting of Russian power towards cozying up towards authoritarian rulers and towards isolationism. That's the first thing that strikes one. This is not what one would have expected from the Republican Party 10, 15 years ago. But it also shows the way in which Vladimir Putin cherry picks history and then misuses the bits, the cherries, if you like, that he picks in order to fit a narrative that excuses his behavior, that makes everybody else responsible for what he's done and himself simply acting in his own self-defense.
And let's just touch on that.
Extraordinary things.
Yeah, Martin, this point about the history, because you've got considerable experience in Soviet history. President Putin, he went on for almost half an hour about the history, centuries back. What are your thoughts about the truth of what Putin said about that history?
Well, the reality is that Ukraine and Russia have got connected roots, no question about that. So Putin talks about the fact that the first Russian state was centered on Kiev. That's right. It became an Orthodox community. That's correct. He talks about the fact that in the 17th century, the leader of the Ukrainian Cossacks accepted Russian overlordship. Yes, that's correct. But he ignores vast amounts of things. He ignores the independence of Ukraine. He ignores their separate culture. He ignores the fact that at times in its history, Ukraine was part of the Lithuanian Duchy and then the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. How the Russians tried to basically Russify Ukraine in the 19th century. How at the first opportunity in 1917, the Ukrainians broke away from Russia and then were brought back by the Red Army in 1921. How they suffered terribly under Stalin. How at the first opportunity in 1991, they voted overwhelmingly for independence, which was accepted by Russia when it signed up to Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons in the Budapest Memorandum of 1994. He ignores all of that and he says, well, because we have had roots connected in the past, it's fine to take it back. You just can't ignore the recent history of the places.
That's right, and it seems that the interviewer Tucker Carlson, I mean, some of his questions were, well, they were just basically sort of open goals to Putin. He didn't ask him about war crimes. He didn't ask him about political prisoners like Alexander Navalny. And also, he seemed to contradict himself, Putin, in the interview. On the one hand, he said that he didn't want to go any further than Ukraine, that he wasn't interested in Poland or Latvia. But on the other hand, he said he wanted to get rid of the Nazis in Ukraine, and that was his key objective.
Yeah, this is part of this whole narrative of Putin that he's saying, well, actually, we Russians acted in self-defense in 2022. You know, these Ukrainians were being Nazified. They were threatening us. They were going to be an advanced base for NATO. And of course, what we see here is that there's been a failed attempt by the Russians to intervene in Ukrainian politics for the last 15 years. And whenever it fails, the Russians play hardball. So in 2014, having said that Crimea was part of Ukraine, they go and take it back. They stir up trouble. Yes, there had been disaffection in the Donbass area of eastern Ukraine against Kyiv. That's true. There were a lot of Russian speakers there who weren't happy. But the Russians actively fan the flames of this. And then when they invade, they say, we're only doing this for our own self-defense. And it's simply not true. The Russians here are acting to control their own backyard and actually subvert an independent state and deny it the ability to decide its own future. But it's not Putin's fault. Remember, as Putin will tell you, it's all the fault of the West who are threatening Russia. It's a quite extraordinary narrative, and Tucker Carlson gave him all the opportunities to do so. Carlson effectively said, here's an open goal, Vladimir, kick the ball in there.
That's right. It was a 2-hour interview, and that's the point. For me, I think the key thing is that Putin said before he invaded Ukraine that he wasn't going to invade Ukraine. And now he says he's no interest in Poland or Latvia. Why would anybody trust such a man who's completely broken his pledges?
And that's absolutely the case, isn't it? I mean, I personally do not think that Putin is about to invade the Baltic states or about to invade Finland or Poland, because the Russian military have been so degraded by their failure in Ukraine. I do not think that is possible. I do not think it's on his agenda. But I think if he gets away with this in Ukraine, as well as Ukrainian suffering, I think he will cause trouble on the eastern borders of NATO for years to come. Look at Kaliningrad.
Absolutely
right. That area where Lithuania and Poland and Kaliningrad meet trouble.
Martin, thank you very much indeed for your thoughts on that Tucker Carlson interview. That's Martin Wittock, who is a Soviet historian and author. Really intriguing. If you haven't seen the interview, form your own judgment. It's 2 hours long. Take your time, but it's worth watching. Up next, of course, it's National Pizza Day as well as National Invention Day. We're going to be cooking, we're going to be tucking in and showing what it is like to make the perfect slice. You're watching me, Richard Tice, here on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Rishi here. As Prime Minister, I'm focused on delivering on your priorities. So I'll be on the road to join GB News for a special People's Forum on Monday the 12th of February where I'll be taking questions from a live audience about the issues that really matter to you: the economy, immigration, the NHS. See you there.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Patrick Christie's Tonight. Weekdays from 9 p.m.
Mike Freer joins me now. Mike, thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for inviting me.
Firstly, how are you?
It's been a busy day, and it's been quite a traumatic experience. It's a real wrench to walk away from a job that you love, but also a constituency that you've become. You know, I live there; it's my home, and I regard many of my constituents as friends, and it is an amazing place. And to walk away from that is really quite. It's quite an emotional wrench to think this was a job I loved, but unfortunately I can't do it anymore.
Can you talk me through the process? Because you mentioned about the alleged arson attack, etc., being the final straw, but this has been a really quite vile journey to get to this point. So what kind of threats have you had? What's that look like?
Well, like every MP, I mean, you day in, day out, you get abusive emails, you get low-level stuff that, whether we should accept it, but we do, it's graffiti, you know, it's things like, you know, in the past I've had a mock Molotov cocktail left on the office door, meaning we had to evacuate the whole building. I've come out of my house and found a note on my car. Where I live is common knowledge, but what I drive is less so. And it's a few weeks after John Mann had the wheel nuts on his car tampered with. So that all kind of makes you get a bit, you know, what on earth's going on. But I've had two run-ins with the organisation that was Muslims Against Crusades, and people like Anjem Chowdhury, who was behind that organisation, been to prison. But online it said, I used to do surgery in mosques, so I wanted to go out and see people. And online, it's a picture of me saying, you're not welcome in our mosque, let Stephen Timms be a pointed reminder. So it's not very subtle.
Well, just for our viewers and listeners who might not remember that,
Stephen Timms, of course, was stabbed by a woman who'd been radicalised. Thank heavens he survived. So it was a very unsubtle.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back, my friends. We're near the end of the show. There's been a lot of important, serious stuff to discuss. So as we approach lunchtime, what better way than to talk about sort of our changing palates? You know, many people might have been used to a roast dinner on a Sunday, hopefully with the family, but then you might be thinking, well, what about something else? What about a bit of pizza, for example? But National Pizza Day was just 2 days ago. And the pizza sort of started the National Pizza Day in the early 2000s. 20 years later, we're celebrating this fantastic Italian dish. What better than to be joined in the studio by a founder of his own pizza shop, Andrea Asciuti, to talk about some of these signature pizzas. Andrea, thank you for coming in. You've got some pizzas here. But first of all, you're an entrepreneur. You've set up your own business, your own pizza shop.
Yes, I am.
Just give us a flavour of how what that's like.
It's really exciting. It's a lot of hard work and passion behind. And yeah, we've been trading since 2021. And next month, the coming February, will be 1 year that we have our first shop, brick and mortar. And yeah, thank you for having me here.
No,
today.
it's fantastic. And I mean, it must be very nerve-wracking setting up a new pizza shop.
Yes,
a lot of hard work, a lot of stress.
Especially when we started. We started post-pandemic. So we opened 2 weeks just before the lift off of all the restrictions. So they've been hard times, but we still here, we're still standing.
You're still here. That's what we like. I love that entrepreneurial spirit. And pizzas are fantastic. So talk us through making a pizza, and you wouldn't want me making it because it'd be a disaster. but talk us through the making of it.
So we do a natural fermentation process to make our pizzas. We do a 72 hours fermentation. This is our dough.
Wow,
and now
72 hours?
Yeah, we use a very small amount of yeast, and we let the dough raise naturally. So it's very light, very digestible, and very light.
Look at this. I mean, that's a real art.
There we are.
I'm definitely not. I mean, you can practice this at home, but if I practice this in the studio, it'd go horribly wrong. Look at this. So
we
what
use
have we got here?
high-quality ingredients. So we do the base with the San Marzano DOP tomato.
Oh, the smell is fantastic.
Thank you, Richard. Then we do drizzle of Parmesan.
Bit of Parmesan on top there. All
couple
sorts.
of leaves of basil.
There's the basil going on.
And then last but not least, our fior di latte mozzarella.
And the quality of the mozzarella, that's obviously
mozzarella
very
is really
important.
Yeah, it comes from the Napoli area, from Agerola, is the background of the Sorrento Peninsula, and they do a very good mozzarella up there. So really good
So
quality
that's
product.
really, really important.
Yes. Then we finish our pizza with the drizzle of extra virgin olive oil.
Drizzle of extra oil, yeah.
And then we are ready to go in the oven for roughly 120 seconds.
120 seconds, so a couple of minutes, so it really is. And what's the temperature of that oven?
450 degrees to 450 to 500, depending on the need and the rhythm of the work.
And how many seconds either way to get it wrong or to burn it?
To get it wrong is easy. So
Easy,
5
too
to
easy.
10 seconds can get
5 to 10 seconds either
especially
way.
if the oven is too hot,
Right.
it can get burned easily underneath. So there's a lot of work.
There's a lot of work.
There's a lot of
Absolutely
work.
And also the sort of the different crusts, the different thickness of crust. Do you do that, or do you have your own standard that you stick to?
We do a traditional Neapolitan pizza, so we do very thin in the middle and a bit thicker at the edge. You can see here is about 1 to 2 centimeters thick, and there's the fluffiness of the dough is due to the high hydration of the dough that we do. We do nearly 70% hydration on this dough here.
Okay, so that's your sort of format.
Yes.
And the whole pizza. There are so many pizza restaurants now. Do you do both in the restaurant and delivery and takeaway?
Yes. After the post-pandemic, I'll say nearly 40% of our business is delivery. Now.
Nearly 40%.
We do have a small restaurant. We do 30-seater, but we try to be...
Trying to get the best of both worlds, and adjust that. And, obviously money is tight. Are you noticing any different in demand or in for the lower cost pizzas?
They've been the last couple of months have been quite struggle, especially September, October, and November. They wasn't the best, but I'll say I like to be for everyone. So even if the cost of living are increasing, I'm trying to keep the prices.
Yeah, and is that hard for you in terms of keeping the price of your supplies down?
It's hard, but I'm working in my business in person, so I'm able to keep at least one of the costs.
Absolutely.
Down,
well, you're the boss on the shop floor. Andrea, absolutely fantastic. I'm going to throw over to the great Dawn Neeson, whose show is next. Dawn, I suspect that you are a serious pizza lover.
Are you going to ask me what topping I like, Mr. Tice? Mushroom, by the way, it's mushroom. But we've got a cracking show coming up for you. We have got Why Carousels Are Cancelled. You've heard me right. Kids roundabouts are no longer the right thing to do. The woke army, why we don't have a defence force anymore. And also, what to do with a problem called Boris Johnson.
The problem called Boris Johnson. Why is he back on the agenda?
You'll have to watch the show and you'll find out. I also know what pizza topping he likes as well.
Come on, you haven't. I mean, you like mushroom. I'm not a mushroom fan, Dawn, but.
What's wrong with mushrooms? That's being mushroomist. Come on.
Oh, don't you start.
A bit of tomato?
I love tomato, everything, but I think Andrea's got a fantastic selection here.
It looks lovely. I can't wait. I'm so sad I'm not invited to actually try.
You're not going to be able to enjoy it. Dawn, have a great show. Andrea, thank you so much for coming in. Absolutely brilliant. Best of luck. Keep up with that. Thank you very much for you for watching, to all my guests and for your company. Next up, of course, it's Dawn Neeson. I'll see you soon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. Quite a misty, murky start for some of us today, but the theme generally is that skies will be brightening. Low pressure is still around, and these weather fronts around at times will be bringing showers, some spells of rain, but in between those fronts there will be elements of something a little bit sunnier and brighter. You can see where those showers are around first thing this afternoon, particularly into areas of eastern England and the far north east of Scotland, staying very wet here. Showers quite frequent across western areas of Scotland into Northern Ireland as well, but some brighter spells around at times, so do enjoy those sunnier spells where you do get them. Temperatures around 8 to 12 degrees Celsius, not doing too badly for the time of year. It will stay very wet across Shetland right throughout this evening. A very breezy night to come here as well. Showers always quite persistent for western areas of Scotland, actually turning wintry over the higher ground here, even across higher ground areas of Northern Ireland and Northern England throughout the night as well. But some clearing skies in there as well, and underneath those clearing skies, temperatures will take a little bit more of a tumble compared to some recent nights, down to low single figures for many of us, and a patchy frost and some icy stretches are possible first thing in the morning. Monday then turns into a day of sunshine and showers. Those showers always most frequent and heaviest further towards the northwest. Areas further east and south could stay largely dry throughout the day. A decent number of sunny spells in there and quite a pleasant one. Temperatures again generally around 6 to 11 degrees Celsius. Enjoy those sunnier spells where you do get them though, because cloud is looking like it will stretch its way back in for the middle part of next week. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside from Boxed Boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi, Rishi here. As Prime Minister, I'm focused on delivering on your priorities. So I'll be on the road to join GB News for a special People's Forum on Monday the 12th of February, where I'll be taking questions from a live audience about the issues that really matter to you: the economy, immigration, the NHS. See you there.
...2024, a battleground year.
The year the nation decides.
As the parties gear up their campaigns for the next general election.
Who will be left standing when the British people make one of the biggest decisions of their lives?
Who will rise?
And who will fall?
Let's find out together.
For every moment, the highs, the lows, the twists and turns.
We'll be with you for every step of this journey.
In 2024, GB News is Britain.